Mars, home of the god of war, little green men, and the marauding spaceships of H.G. Wells and his radio sidekick, Orson. My name is J.J. Webb, and I'm here to tell you about some unknown heroes of the exploration of Mars. Mankind's been fascinated with Mars for a long, long time. Aristotle is the first known writer to describe it. In 1609, Galileo was the first to observe it via telescope. I've been told that in the 19th century, 1877, when the resolution of telescopes reached a level sufficient for surface features to be identified, an Italian astronomer, Giovanni Schiaparelli, used a 22-centimeter telescope to produce the very first detailed maps of Mars. The first man-made objects to successfully land on the surface of Mars were Russian. They were part of the Soviet Mars probe program launched in 1971. There were two of them, Mars Probe 2 and Mars Probe 3, that made it to the surface. But both of the probes lost contact within seconds of landing on the planet. Mars has eaten a lot of probes over the years. In fact, it has eaten more than half of the probes sent from Earth. NASA's Viking mission to Mars consisted of 2 orbiters and 2 landers. Both landers successfully deployed on the planet in July and in September of 1976. This is what the orbiter looked like. The orbiters mapped the surface and looked for good places to land. They were constructed in Denver, Colorado by Martin Marietta, nowadays known as Lockheed Martin. Viking 1 launched in August of 1975, and Viking 2 in September of that year. The NASA mission initiated in 1968, and its goals were to view and map the planet, analyze the planet's composition and its weather, and search for life. The director of mission planning for the project worked for Jet Propulsion Laboratories, and his name was Gentry Lee. This is a model of the lander, and these are the cameras. Here's one of the cameras that's at the Smithsonian. The Viking landers sent back the first color pictures of Mars and mapped the surface of Mars so well, the images are still used to this day. Here's the noted space explorer, Dr. Carl Sagan, standing beside a model of the lander. And Dr. Sagan will be the last known hero of Mars explorations I'm going to mention. The key to viewing the planet was this pair of cameras mounted on each lander. A couple years ago, on the 30th anniversary of the mission, Gentry Lee said, "Every single time we've gone there, we've seen a brand new Mars. But the biggest brand new Mars of all time was in July of 1976. On July 20th, to be exact, Viking 1 sent this picture to him, to all of us. That was the day the very first images ever to be broadcast from the surface of another planet came to NASA, from Mars. Each Viking lander camera utilized 2 facsimile type cameras to take pictures of the scene around the lander. The cameras provided color, black and white, infrared, and stereoscopic photographs. Imaging data were used primarily to characterize the site and determine its geological setting. Images also enhanced data from some experiments and were necessary for the success of the other experiments. These pictures are only a few of the images that came back from those landers. I know. It looks like somewhere in Arizona. The Viking mission changed many people's lives. It changed mine because in 1973, when I went to work for Tinsley Laboratories as an electrical designer, Charlie Peake, The operations manager for Tinsley at the time told me early in that year, "We're going to Mars." "Who's going to Mars?" I asked. "Tinsley," he said. His excitement was contagious, and I hired on because, well, I was 25 years old, and going to Mars seemed like a really cool thing to do. I had some knowledge of interfacing machine tools to mini-computers, and that was what Charlie was looking for. Tinsley Laboratories had come into being 50 years before Viking, when a high school teacher at Galileo High School in San Francisco decided to start a company to build telescopes. His name was Clayton Tinsley. He made telescopes and related products in Berkeley on Wheeler Street for more than a decade. This is the storefront. Apparently, he drove a Ford. He advertised his products as supplies for the amateur, telescopes for schools and homes. He offered Cassegrainians up to 20-inch, Newtonians to 10 inches. And among the telescopes he made in 1929 was a 12-inch Cassegrain telescope that was used at the Mount Wilson Observatory until 1935. In 1937, Clayton Tinsley sold his company to Don Jenkins. Mr. Jenkins moved the operation to Ashby Street in Berkeley. In addition to telescopes, he began manufacturing binoculars for the U.S. Army in 1941. In 1946, the company was first incorporated. And in 1961, the company became a public corporation and moved into a 34,000 square foot facility on 6th Street in Berkeley. During the 60s and into the early 70s, Tinsley made phosphor exposure lenses used in color TV manufacturing. In the 1980s, they began manufacturing microlithography optics used in the manufacture of integrated circuits and microprocessors, something they do to this day. Sometime during the 40s, Mr. Jenkins hired a young astronomer, Harvey Morton, to work for the laboratories. And in 1973, when I went to work there, Harvey Morton was the president of the company. The excitement I mentioned that was so contagious in Charlie Peak was planted there by Harvey Morton. Harvey was the visionary that infected us all. He wanted to make high-precision optics, and he wanted to use computers to create those surfaces. Oh, and along the way, he wanted to go to Mars. So while Gentry Lee plotted and planned the Viking mission at Jet Propulsion Labs, Harvey Morton plotted and planned high-precision optical surfaces at Tinsley Labs. And because Viking needed high-precision optics for those Viking cameras, Tinsley Labs got to go to Mars. As I've said, Charlie Peak was the operations manager of Tinsley at the time, and most everyone worked either for him or for Harvey. Brad Oland, one of the brightest optical designers in the world, worked for Harvey. Dan Bajuk, who worked in the computer room massaging the IBM 1130 and System 7 computers, worked for Harvey. Ev Baker, the best optician in the world at the time, worked for Charlie. So did Art Simpson, Bob Smith, Roland Wolf, Bob Davidson, and Julius Meckel, some of the best optical designers and opticians that ever helped explore space. Their names don't get mentioned too often, but they should be mentioned, so I'm mentioning them. And Bob Arano, Tinsley's Chief Financial and Chief Operations Officer, needs to be mentioned as well. He was the man who understood the real world and how contracts worked. He became president of Tinsley Labs after Harvey retired in the 1980s. These were the men that inspired a young engineer's dreams and showed him how to dream big. It's been 35 years since we worked together in the early stages of the development of computer-controlled optical surfacing, but I remember clearly how much pride each of them had in the things they were doing, how intense they were about space and time and precision, and how much pride they had in those pictures coming back from Mars. In later years, Tinsley Laboratories would make aspherics for pilot training, missile guidance, heads-up displays, and provide optics for some of the most sensitive satellites orbiting the Earth. As well, the company made the optics to correct the Hubble Space Telescope's blurry images under the direction of Bob Kessner. And they made most of the segments of the twin Keck telescopes. For most of the major missions to explore space over the last 30 years, Tinsley has provided the precision optics critical to the success of each project, all the way from Mariner, Viking, and Voyager to the Hubble and Keck telescopes, and on into the future with the James Webb Space Telescope. Yuri's Night is a celebration of space exploration. And the hope is that during Yuri's Night, the young men and women of today will see and hear what went on in the past. And they'll learn what it is in space exploration that's in it for them. All I can say is that space exploration once helped a young man in the 70s learn how to dream big. Helped him learn how to make one's wildest dreams come true. Space exploration and the men who made it possible have inspired whole generations, especially mine. The men of Tinsley Labs and the many other contractors who worked creating Viking are real heroes. And now we're looking for new heroes to continue the tradition. Maybe you? How about you? You look 25. Doesn't space exploration sound like a pretty neat thing to do?